Welcome, everyone, to the Daily Fantasy Pivot on RotoCurve. We, of course, are a show aimed to teach you guys how to play the game of daily fantasy basketball and discuss all the best plays of the day. Today is going to be a very interesting one. Uh, I would say don't forget to check out the free roll, but that started 2 days ago, so keep an eye out for our next free roll. Of course, you can always find those at rotocurve.com/free roll. You can also find the NBA tools on rotocurve.com. You go to rotocurve.com, you look at the top, there's NBA, there's PGA, there's a chat, there's all kinds of good stuff there for your liking. As you can see, a few of us, it looks like Benny's sporting the beard. I know I've got the beard today. Is this in honor of National James Harden Day, Benny?
No, it's just that I'm lazy and I don't like shaving, so this is easier this way. And my wife's from West Virginia, so she likes her men looking rugged, so, it works for me.
Yeah, I'm just using that as an excuse, to be quite honest. Nick, though, you should be happy. There's going to be some mentions of James Harden tonight, so there will be other people besides you in that corner.
Other people losing money besides me.
Yeah, lately James Harden's been an interesting bet. He kind of bounced back last game, but I again think I like his prospects tonight. And of course, let's introduce the guy behind pretty much all the tools and all the happenings on RotoCurve, Mr. RotoCurve himself, Josh Collacchi. Josh, what's going on? I like the backwards hat look we got going on tonight.
I miss my beard now. Oh Jesus, my voice is going and stuff. I miss my beard. Benny has his, you have yours. Nick kind of has his. I don't know. I think what happened is I made Lunchables and stuff. Made my voice crack. Yeah, hopefully we get that fixed.
Oh, I think we just had our first official squeak on this show, so everyone, please tweet Collacchi and let him know how you feel about this. But let's get into the slate tonight. We got, I think it's 8 games, if my math is correct, which it often isn't. We got some interesting ones. We got some potential blowouts in terms of Philly and Oklahoma City. We got some that are supposed to be close in terms of James Harden, T-Wolves, and some of the other ones. What are our initial thoughts about the slate tonight? I know I always ask stars and scrubs, or if we want to keep it balanced. And Benny, I think I know your answer, at least in tournaments, having discussed this with you before the show.
Yeah, I think there are definitely enough value plays that stars and scrubs is a viable option tonight, but something you didn't mention about tonight's slate that kind of struck me when I first looked at it, the lowest total on the board today is 211 points. So it doesn't really matter which game you want to target. There's going to be points all over the place here. So I think there's a lot of different ways to go, which makes this, very interesting slate to look at.
Yeah, I agree with you. It isn't really often that you find these slates. Usually there's like a Bulls Heat game on there or something like that that's got like the 192 total that you're like, oh, I'm going to overlook that one. Or at least, oh, there's one guy and that's about it. And I don't think you can really do that tonight. Collacchi, what do you make? I know you're I'm going to call you the 76ers guy, even though that's kind of an offensive term. I don't want you to take that like a slur or anything like that, but you're our 76ers guy. What do you make of the Thunder and 76ers tonight? Is there any chance in hell this game stays, within arm's reach?
Yeah, I think the Sixers definitely have a chance, and then like the next 47 minutes will happen. So it's not going to be a game that I think is going to go 4 quarters. But with that being said, we will talk about what Russell Westbrook has done to my Sixers, and it's not pretty.
Nick, you're usually on the stars and scrubs approach. Is that kind of the way you're leaning tonight?
Yeah, for sure. That's always my thing. I like to get two or three stars in there, so I think it's definitely doable tonight for sure.
Yeah, especially on FanDuel. I mean, I think a lot of nights you look at the roster you can make there, and it's certainly, at least in terms of stars and scrubs, you can get more firepower as opposed to DraftKings. So let's get started with the point guards. I mean, we've already mentioned Westbrook. I'm just going to start with the guy that I really like tonight, Ricky Rubio, a guy who quietly has doubled in 5 of his last 6 games. And you look at the matchup, and they're projected the second highest scoring game behind Golden State. Golden State, of course, has the fastest pace in the NBA, but the Rockets are number 5, so I think this one should be a nice pace. And I think that matters more than the matchup with Patrick Beverley, quite frankly, for Ricky Rubio, because, an individual matchup doesn't matter for a guy who's not looking to score. He may man up on him, but that's just gonna, That's going to encourage him to pass. I mean, the pace is going to help him rebound. So I think we could be looking at a game where Rubio pushes a triple-double. And at his price, I guess it's $12,300 on Fantasy Draft, $6,900 on DraftKings. I mean, it's still in a price range where I'm comfortable with it. So let's go to you, Nick. Who do you like at point guard tonight?
Yeah, I like Rubio a lot, too. I think this is a great spot for him. Even, like you said, Beverly's defense shouldn't affect him too much. He's double-digit assists in 5 of his last 6 games. Clearing 5x on FanDuel lately, so his price has come up to $7K on FanDuel, but I think it's still an awesome price for him. But for point guard, I really like Westbrook a lot. I mean, the blowout scares me a little, but I think he's going to get him and Durant, one of them's going to go insane. I'm just trying to think. Westbrook's going to have the ball in his hand enough that I think he should definitely approach 45, 50 FanDuel points with ease. But I also like Reggie Jackson against the Kings. The shortness of breath thing is a little scary, especially if this game's going to be up-tempo, running a ton, so that's a little scary to think about. But I think this is a prime spot for Reggie Jackson tonight, too.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've been looking at that whole roster because anytime someone goes against the Kings, I think you got to analyze it, find at least 1 or 2 guys because they allow the most points per game. So someone's going to get theirs against the Kings. But I agree with you. Shortness of breath, not something I love to mess around with. And that sounds like that could be some sort of minutes limit. So that's a little bit scary. Josh, who do you like at point guard tonight? Are you on the same page or you got some other ideas?
I do like Westbrook as well, and I know we do have to worry about the blowout factor, but here's a thing that I looked at this morning. For those of you that have seen my piece, you've seen the stat already, but in the last 4 games against the Sixers, 2 of them, of course, without Durant, so that's something to keep in mind, but Westbrook has averaged 2.3, 1.4, 2, and 1.7 fantasy points or FanDuel points per minute. That's one of the highest rates I think that we could have ever seen for guys playing big minutes like that. So one of the things with Westbrook is even if he only plays 3 quarters, he still has an incredible chance to get a ton of fantasy points. And that rate was just FanDuel, not even considering DraftKings, where he had one game where he averaged 2.7 DraftKings points per minute. That's just absurd to me.
Yep. That is, I mean, even in 3 quarters, the guy should play close to 30 minutes. I mean, you would think. So it's hard to imagine a scenario where Russell Westbrook doesn't end up with 40 fantasy points. The question is he going to play enough to end up with 60 or 70? And I think that's, the decision you got to make tonight. And I don't know. For me, I feel pretty comfortable with using him in cash. But Benny, what do you think? Westbrook, Rubio, or do you have some other guys on your list?
Well, I mean, I like the guys that you mentioned already, but let me throw a few more names out there for people to think about. You got Brandon Knight at a pretty decent price around the industry going up against the LA Lakers. Lakers have been one of the best matchups for opposing point guards, one of the worst teams at trying to slow them down. It's going to be a high total game there. They're all high total games today, but we're looking at 200, and I'm trying to find it here. I think 218 points or so in that one, so there's going to be some scoring. He's a guy that at around like the 6,500, 7K price range can get you 35 to 40 fantasy points in this matchup, so I like him. I also like Drew Holiday, who nobody mentioned yet today. Portland is a paced-up team. We know Damian Lillard doesn't like to play a lot of defense. As far as I know, New Orleans is still banged up. I didn't hear anything definitive on Norris Cole, but he was doubtful earlier today, so obviously, if he's out, we're going to keep getting big minutes and big usage out of, Drew Holiday in that one. And then going down to the cheap end of the spectrum, Elfrid Payton is still questionable. We don't have a definitive answer one way or the other, but Brandon Jennings has been a really good fill-in for him. I want to say you have to look at what site you're playing him on. Over on FanDuel, he's up to like 47 or 4,800, so that kind of saps the upside out of him. I still think there's a little bit of upside there. But at 4,300 on DraftKings, I really like him. And if he's below like 9K or so still on Fantasy Draft, I didn't look what he is over there yet today. That's another really good spot to look to use him.
Who are you looking for 9K? I could give you a price right now.
Brandon Jennings. What's his price over there? He was like 73 the other day.
8,000.
Yes. So for 8,000, he's basically 4K on DraftKings, and he is 4,300 on DraftKings. So I like his price on those 2 sites a lot more than I like it over at FanDuel. But I still think even on FanDuel, if there's no Elf Payton, 4,700 is about 23 fantasy points for 5x. So he's still cash game safe over there, but I don't think I'd use him in tournaments over there.
Yeah, the good news is that there are some other guards you can swap to, I think, tonight. If you're going really cheap at point guard, I think if you're relying on Brandon Jennings and all of a sudden it turns out that Peyton's playing, there are a few other guys that are listed as point guard that don't necessarily play there. Josh, do you maybe want to touch on Tim Frazier, who I know you like tonight, and give us some insight into why he's a playable asset?
I can't believe we're talking about this guy again, but like we said on Wednesday, it's that time in daily fantasy basketball. It's at that time of year where there are guys that just come out in bunches with value. And Frazier, for me, is that guy tonight. Now, Norris Cole has to be out because I think that would be the main way that he would play. He did play 27 minutes the other night, and that was off the bench. And he's supposed to start at the two guard tonight, which is interesting. So that gives him a matchup against McCollum, who, like Lillard, isn't very interested in playing defense. And at that price, it's definitely worth a pivot because I think a lot of people will be on Brandon Jennings if Elfrid Payton is out. And I think for a good reason that would be a decent pivot. But like Ricky just said, if Elfrid Payton is in, I think the pivot there easily would be to Tim Frazier at that price.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the other guy I would suggest, but I don't think he's necessarily a pivot for cash, but if we're speculating that this Oklahoma City game is going to be a blowout, how about Cameron Payne, who could get at least a full quarter at the end worth of run? I think we're going to speculate on Enes Kanter. I think a lot of us are going to like him, but if they've got that second unit kind of mop-up crew in, couldn't Cameron Payne come up big? He's a guy who in some games, in that exact role has come through. Benny, what do you think about using him speculatively, or is that too much for you?
Yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't do it because for a couple, maybe $1,000 more at most, I could come up to, Jennings, who, if Elf Payton is out, is going to see a definite 25 to 30 minutes of action. I like knowing that the guys I'm going to take as punt plays are going to see, a decent amount of minutes because then even if they don't play well, they still have a chance to pay off for you. If things happen to go Philly's way and they start hitting a bunch of shots and Cameron Payne only plays like 15 minutes, the 8 fantasy points that he gets for you are going to kill your lineup. So I probably wouldn't do it that way, but for a tournament, anything's viable for a tournament if you can justify it in your own head, but I would have a tough time justifying it.
All right, Nick, so we've identified our cash options. How about some big names we haven't really mentioned yet? I mean, if you like Westbrook, how about Steph Curry or Dame Lillard? I mean, are those guys that need to be auto consideration for tournament?
Definitely Lillard. I'm not on Curry tonight. I just think that could turn into a blowout too, and he hasn't been hitting 5x at all on FanDuel lately. I'd maybe throw him in a tournament, but cash, I'd much rather pay the 300 extra for Westbrook. But Damian Lillard for sure. Against who are they playing? New Orleans, right? New Orleans, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely that matchup's great against Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday plays defense, but I think this is a great spot still. I think 45 FanDuel points is definitely within reach for Lillard tonight. His price has come down, so it's more doable on FanDuel for sure. But on this cheap end we were talking about Jennings and guys like that. But I wanted to mention Isaiah Cannon, who's still 3,900 on FanDuel. He's gonna get 25 minutes easily playing time tonight. And then if it's a blowout, he's going to get a ton of run with the second unit. So he's playing two guard, but he's handling the ball a little bit with the second unit.
Yeah, I've noticed his fantasy points in the mid-20s the last few. That role's increased with some of the injuries, and they seem committed to him. So I agree. If this is a fast-paced game and he could see his minutes, I think you got to consider him. Does anyone have anything else to say at the point guard position, or should we move on?
Yeah, real quick, I just wanted to throw in that I think the reason Steph Curry is a great tournament play tonight is he's Steph Curry, and everybody's talking about Westbrook for an extra $300 or going down to Lillard because of the matchup, and Curry's just kind of getting forgotten. When they're on the road, they tend not to blow people out as often as they do at home, so you could get a full 35, 36 minutes out of him. And I know he hasn't been great, but again, he's Steph Curry, so he could go out there and hit 10 three-pointers tonight with 12 assists and grab 6 rebounds, and the next thing you know, he's got 65 fantasy points, and Philly game turns into a blowout, and, he outscores Westbrook by 10 or 12 at, 1/15 of the ownership. So for a tournament, I definitely have a couple shares of Steph Curry, and I'm hoping he goes crazy tonight.
There you go. And I just want to mention a few tidbits from the the chat room that have been entertaining. Benny, someone says your beard game is strong tonight, so apparently I got to work on mine since you're being singled out. And apparently the way Collacchi worded, if you checked out my piece this morning, got some people's eyebrows up. So apparently people do not want to be checking out your piece.
Oh, come on, guys.
Anyways, let's move on to shooting guard. Because the beard is certainly applicable there, I think James Harden is the play. I actually think he's the safest of all of the superstars we've named thus far between Curry, Westbrook, and Harden, because I think this game stays very close. And, I mean, you look at this Timberwolves team that's allowing the 7th most points. I mean, Harden obviously scores the 2nd most points of any player. I love this. I just think it sets up for him. He basically, over the last 2 years, has dominated this Timberwolves team, and I know they were a little different last year without Karl Anthony Towns protecting the rim, but he went off for 60 twice. I mean, in fast-paced games, you always have that feeling with him, and I just think, this one, I'm not worried like Westbrook that, the fourth quarter he may or may not sit. So if it's 38 minutes with Harden or 30 minutes with Westbrook, give me Harden. So, Nick, is that in line with what you're thinking tonight, or you got someone else in position?
You always know I'm on Harden, so hopefully, I mean, he's been terrible the last 3 games, so like my money's been going down the toilet lately, but I think it's coming back up tonight. I mean, the T-Wolves are 22nd against shooting guards and defense efficiency and 27th as a team, so I just don't see anyone who's going to stop this guy on that side of the ball. Like Levine should guard him or Rubio. I don't see any of those guys stopping Harden tonight.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you. Benny, I know that you like some of the mid-tiers always, so let's rattle down your list.
Yeah, well, basically, I think the one guy that stands out in the mid-tier is the one guy I'm going with. I'm not even messing with anybody else, but C.J. McCollum's in a great spot tonight. He goes up against, it's a fast-paced game that McCollum has, goes up against New Orleans, 218 points expected in that game with like a 2-point spread. Now, the thing that people don't realize, there's a lot of people that look at game logs, and what they're going to see is him with like 25 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. Well, 2 of those games they got blown out by 20, and the other game they blew somebody out by 30. So all 3 of those games, he only played like 26, 27 minutes because he wasn't in the fourth quarter because the game was pretty much in hand one way or the other. And then in the last game where they actually needed him to play his normal minutes, played 38 minutes against the Spurs and put up 40 fantasy points. He was a guy that was priced at like 76, 7,700 on DraftKings and FanDuel, and his price tonight is only 6,400. So at 6,400 over on DraftKings, if you could get, 30, 40 fantasy points out of him, you're basically getting 6x. And in a good matchup like this against New Orleans in a fast-paced game, I think you can get 35 to 45 fantasy points out of him. So I have McCollum on a lot of teams. I think his price is also 6,500 on FanDuel, if I'm not mistaken. Which
64. 64.
Yeah, 64. So if he's the same price on both sites, you need a little bit of a lower multiplier most of the time on FanDuel. So I think you're crazy if you don't lock him in as one of your shooting guards tonight over on FanDuel. On DraftKings, I still love him even more, but on FanDuel, he's just way too cheap for me.
Yeah, and I guess if you're alluding to just FanDuel, I can get on board with it because I was thinking about DraftKings, and I mean, if you can afford Harden, do it. But even if you're going mid-tier, I think we got to be on Lowry watch. And if he sits, I mean, the usage for DeMar DeRozan gets astronomical to the point where I think you have to start him. And I kind of mentioned in my piece today for Fantasy Draft that you look at DeRozan's game log versus the Celtics, and he's been awesome against them. I mean, he's gone over 40 fantasy points 3 of the last 4 times. And you look, I actually posted a video of his highlights from the last game. People are going to worry about that matchup with Avery Bradley, and he did all of his damage against Avery Bradley. I mean, you give him an uptick in pace. I mean, this is an all-star caliber player. They will switch off of him. He'll call for a switch at the top of the key. It's not just like a Darrell Revis is shadowing him around. There's picks in the NBA. They can find ways to get him open, and they have. So I really like DeMar DeRozan tonight. Collacchi, who do you like at the shooting guard position?
I'm just going to make it simple at the 2-guard spot tonight. I like Harden, and I like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Of course, we talked about Harden before, how he has struggled a little bit of late, but take a look at what he's done against Minnesota. In the last 7 games, I believe, he has 43 or more in every FanDuel point, so it's over 45 on DraftKings. In each of those games against Minnesota, he has 2 games of 64 or more against Minnesota. This is in the last 6, so he has that high upside. And as Nick said, he has been struggling lately, but as we talked about before, he had some tough matchups in there against guys that are good on-ball defenders. So I think with this price coming down a little bit, he's the guy that I'm spending for in cash. And to pair with him, especially on FanDuel when you need to use 2 shooting guards, I do like Caldwell Pope a lot because he's one of the biggest minutes guys in the NBA. He's close to 40 a game now as he returned to game shape, which for the Pistons means you're basically playing the whole game. He has that excellent matchup against Sacramento, which we always talk about. They have been last in the NBA pretty much all season, but I have them ticking to 29th today, right below New Orleans, who, as Benny mentioned, has C.J. McCollum going against them. So I think Caldwell Pope is a nice pairing because of the matchup, because of the minutes, and considering the fact that he's just 5,300 on FanDuel and a little bit more on other sites. You can pair him with Harden, and you can have 2 shooting guards for the price of about 7,200 each. And to be able to get Harden there and a guy that can get 30, that's an excellent pairing for me.
Yeah, let's go over that concept for people because that was kind of my strategy yesterday with Garrett Temple. Once Allen Anderson and Bradley Beal were deemed out, I mean, now you're talking about a guy probably playing 30-plus minutes against an awful defense at a low price. I mean, aren't guys in that situation pretty much, if we think they're decent caliber NBA players, aren't they pretty much in consideration for cash games automatically if we think they're playing minutes against a terrible defense? Benny, why don't you take that because you're nodding your head?
Yeah, I mean, the one caveat I want to throw in here, and this is something that, I think a lot of people get messed up with. You said, like, they're decent caliber NBA players. So it's not just the fact that they're getting minutes, but they could actually do a little something with those minutes. People get too caught up on the 6X or 5X kind of thing. When I get a min-price player that I'm putting in my roster, I need him to get me at least 26, 27 fantasy points. And what I really want is a guy who can get me over 30. Because if you look at your roster, on DraftKings you get 8 spots. If you get 30 points out of everybody in each one of those spots, that's only 240 fantasy points. If you get 20 points out of a guy and you're like, oh, well, I got 6X out of him. Yeah, but if he got you 20 fantasy points and you need 300 to have a chance to cash, that means the other 7 guys got to get you 280 points or about 40 points each. So not only can you not miss, but you really need to, hit on the guys that have the biggest games. So it's not just a matter of, oh, well, if I use this min-price guy and he gets me 6X, I can fit in Westbrook or Durant or, Boogie Cousins. You really want to make sure that these guys can get you up to, 30 fantasy points. Because if you can get a guy with 30, and then you can put in one of those guys who has the, ability to get you 60 or 70 fantasy points, like the names we just mentioned, that's how you can wind up, winning a big tournament there, especially if you can get on one of those guys that nobody else is on, like, a Portis or a McBuckets last night who were pretty low owned and still wound up putting up 30-something points. Even Garrett Temple, who was a little higher owned than them, he had such a good game that if you did have him and one of the studs put up 70, that's 100 points out of 2 spots with 6 guys to go that you had, 40K to spend, so 6,500 a guy to spend. You can get some really powerful lineups built that way.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you. And we have a great tool on RotoCurve, right, Josh, with the fantasy points per minute. So you legitimately can look at players' talents now and see, okay, they're going to play an extended role. Are they efficient players?
Yeah, I have an entire, just basically looking at that now, and we have an entire database, basically, which shows every player, what their fantasy points per minute are on DraftKings. So DraftKings points per minute, FanDuel points per minute. It shows their minutes, their games played, even their plus-minus based on their minutes compared to what their minutes have been for the entire season. So it's an excellent database to look at because this is the way you find players that have even bigger roles. But even if not, you can see the guys that are efficient. Maybe guys like Cantor, who basically only played 20 minutes or so until the last couple games, which we'll talk about later. But he's up over a fantasy point and a half per minute, and that's an excellent efficiency target. So you add that to big minutes, and that's exactly how you turn into fantasy points.
Yeah, and of course our favorite Boban, who's just, you said 1.5. I mean, I think that's what he's hovering around too. If only he could play some bigger minutes. Let's talk about some tournament options since I think we got cash covered. I think there are 3 guys who stick out to me that we haven't mentioned. Zach LaVine, against in that exact same Houston matchup, who's basically been shooting 60% every game. He's been ridiculous. Devin Booker, whose usage has been through the roof, and now he gets the Lakers. And I guess there's four names because I want to throw one more in there. I think Wiggins in that same game with Levine, they're kind of the same thing. I think either one of them could go off. I probably wouldn't use both in the same lineup. But then Victor Oladipo, whether or not Peyton plays, I think without Vucevic, his usage is up. And I know it's not the world's greatest matchup, but with Cleveland healthy, I think Oladipo is going to be the one trying to take it at him, keep his team in the game. So I think he's got some serious potential. He's had like 40 and 2 straight. So Oladipo is a monster. Nick, who are you considering for tournaments at the shooting guard position?
I definitely like those names. Levine for sure. I think him and Harden could just go back and forth tonight, including Wiggins. I mean, one of those dudes is going to go off, and I'd lean towards Levine because he handles the ball a lot. He shoots. He can do everything. He gets some peripheral stats for you. But I also like Jordan Clarkson against the Suns. I mean, he handles the ball. He plays guard when Russell's not out there or Huertas isn't out there, so he gets a lot of run. He gets some assists. He'll get a couple boards here and there. But I love that matchup for him. The Suns are 29th against shooting guards and I think 30th against point guards, something like that. So this game sets up perfectly for the guard plays in this game.
Yeah, we didn't mention D'Angelo Russell at point guard, kind of just a name I think we should throw in there. Although if Kobe's playing, that does take him down a notch for me. But Josh, who do you like in tournaments? I mean, are these basically the names that you would use too, or are you sticking with the Caldwell Popes and the guys you mentioned in tournaments as well?
I do like Levine a lot as a volume shooter, and I also really like Klay Thompson tonight. I think this is the perfect game for him, and we will get into that later. But I wanted to mention I saw the Toronto Raptors line just suddenly move 3 points in favor of the Celtics. So to me, that means Lowry could sit. What do you think?
Wow. Yeah, I think that's got to be exactly what that means. If he's on the hinges, they probably know something that we don't. So I would caution people on early lock sites to go with Lowry. That certainly 3 points you said, that's a big movement in a short period of time.
Yeah, that's what it just looked like. It was hovering around. It opened at the Raptors were favored by 3, and it was looking between 1.5 and 2 all day. And I just saw it change all of a sudden now to pick them. So it's a little bit of a change suddenly because usually there's not that much money coming to move it a full point in just a matter of seconds. So that could be something that they're indicating that the line could change because of a player being out. So definitely keep an eye on the Raptors news. And if you don't see anything before lock, as Ricky just mentioned, I'd be cautious to use him on early lock sites.
Does anyone have anything else to say about shooting guard? And I will say about that situation, that probably means Valanciunas is out too. Just want to mention that probably has something to do with it. But does anyone else have anything else to say about shooting guard, or have we covered everything?
Yeah, just a quick note on Oladipo. They just announced that the starters are going to be Brandon Jennings, Oladipo, Fournier, Aaron Gordon, and then Dedmon as well. So earlier today, Vucevic and Elf Payton were both questionable. Vooch got upgraded to probable, so I don't know if he's going to be available off the bench, but it looks like Elfrid Payton's not going to play, so that makes Jennings in play, and it also ticks up the usage for Fournier and Oladipo. Fournier has a tough matchup today. I think Oladipo is probably somebody you want to look at.
There you go. Let's move on to small forward. This one's interesting today. I think a lot of people are going to be going for the superstars here. I mean, we already talked about for Russell Westbrook the concerns. I think all those concerns apply to Kevin Durant as well. And Collacchi kind of mentioned a guy playing big minutes against the Kings that he likes at the shooting guard position. Well, I like Tobias Harris, who I think is going to play a lot of minutes against them. And let me go further in the fact that Andre Drummond was struggling the last game. He really did not look good. The only reason that he came close and actually did meet value is because the Hawks were hacking him. But he really did not have himself a good game, and Tobias Harris looked like the aggressive one on the boards. I mean, he had 19, 11, and 5 against them, and now you're talking about a matchup against a team. By the way, Harris plays mostly power forward and has so far with the Pistons. So, his position is a little misleading, and you look at the Kings, they've allowed the second most fantasy points to opposing power forwards, and now we think about the matchup, and Andre Drummond's kind of a hack to begin with. put him against DeMarcus Cousins, he may have 2 quick fouls, and we may be looking at a lot of Aaron Baines. So in terms of their post scoring and scoring overall and rebounding, Harris may have a pretty extended role in this one, and he's going to push 35, 40 minutes against a terrible defense. So I love Tobias Harris pretty much in all formats. He's usually a cash only guy, but I can see him everywhere. Benny, who do you like tonight?
Yeah, I'm gonna echo your sentiments on Harris to start with, because I don't feel like paying up for Durant or James tonight, and he was the guy that I was actually drawn to too. Playing Sacramento, it's always a game where guys tend to get closer to their ceiling. In 10 to 13 games since he came over, he's had at least 30 fantasy points, or right around 30 fantasy points, including 7 of his last 8 games. So he's playing about as well as anybody. Minutes are up to 30, 35 minutes a game. So I like him a lot. Where I'm not using him, I'm going down today to somebody, and I think everybody's going to be on board with it, but we might get a couple grumbles here. I really think Michael Beasley's a play at only 4,100. You look at the last couple games, he's been 6 games so far he's been on the Rockets since he's come over from, I think he was in China or something playing before this, if I'm not mistaken. And in the last 4 games, 3 of those 4 games, he's had 27 or more fantasy points over on FanDuel. The other game that he didn't have it, he still scored 15 real-life points. So he's got double-digit points in 4 games in a row, and he's not playing a lot of minutes. He played 14, 18, I think 16 and 27 minutes in those 4 games. If he can give you 25 to 30 fantasy points for 4K when he's only playing 16 or 18 minutes, if they actually give him closer to 27 to 25 to 27 minutes that he saw in the last couple games, I think you can get a fantasy point per minute, if not more, is what he's been producing. You could get a 30, 35-point game out of a guy who's only 4K tonight. So I really like Beasley. I think he has a lot of upside, and I think he's legit in a high-paced game like the one he has today.
Well, I saw a smile out of Nick. I think he's on board with that. Nick, why don't you tell us what you're thinking at small forward? It doesn't sound like Beasley got a groan from you.
No, I'm locking him in the cash, actually. I just think it's safe enough where you can actually do it at 4,100 on FanDuel. His usage rate is over 30 like every game. He had one game where he was in the teens, but every other game with the Rockets he's been over 30, 32, somewhere around there. And he had one with like 55 usage rate. So he's getting the ball. He's doing a ton when he's putting it in the bucket. He's getting boards. He can do everything across the floor. So I love this spot. And it's a revenge game because he played for Minnesota right before he went to China, and he did win MVP in China actually. So he's on top of his game right now, and it's good to see him back after he had to leave. But with Beasley, I'm also liking Andrew Wiggins, who's a small forward on FanDuel. I mentioned Wiggins and Levine. I don't want to play both, and I'm thinking I'm leaning Wiggins today because I'm not paying out for Durant, and small forward is just super shallow on FanDuel today. I'd also consider Chandler Parsons at 7,000 in a high-paced game. I know the matchup's not great. The Warriors defense small forward's pretty well. They're number 2 in defense efficiency against that position, but someone's going to have to carry this team if they're going to stick close in it. And Parsons seems like the safest bet. He's been playing a lot of the 4 lately too, so he's getting some boards lately.
Yeah, I think Collacchi's going to touch on that. I know he wrote about that this morning, and I think actually that's one of the more interesting things tonight is to keep an eye out on that Dallas starting lineup, because if they go Pachulia, then it moves Parsons back over to the small forward. But I know they've been starting some smaller lineups with Felton moving Parsons to kind of a stretch 4, which is a really interesting spot for him in this game. Collacchi, do you want to talk about in what situation you do like Parsons?
Yeah, I absolutely love this game tonight. I think it's going to be one of the more fun games we've seen this season. And considering the Golden State is on the road, I don't think it's going to be a game where they have the chance to win by 20 to 25 points. But like Ricky just alluded to, and the same thing with Nick saying, Parsons has been playing the 4. They're starting with Darren Williams, Raymond Felton, Wesley Matthews, and then they have Parsons at the 4 with Dirk at the 5. We all know about the Warriors. I think it's called the Death Lineup with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and then they have Harrison Barnes and Iguodala playing the wings with the 3 and the 4, and then Draymond's at center. This matchup works out perfectly together, and I think they're literally just going to be running up and down the floor all night long. And we know that offense flows through Chandler Parsons. I know Dirk Nowitzki gets a lot of work and a lot of looks, but I think this is a perfect spot for Parsons to have a chance to get a ton of shots, a ton of assists. There's going to be a ton of possessions in this game. So the guy that basically runs the offense for me on one side, I definitely want to have him, and that's Parsons.
Yeah, I will note that there's no Iguodala, but I still think that they'll go small in some of the lineups because it's what they do. I mean, even if they replace Iguodala with Spates, they're not exactly gigantic. And I will note that I think we'll get to Spates because I think lately he's been just ridiculous. We talk about Enes Kanter in terms of efficiency. Spates has just been coming in, and he's kind of been like their Beasley, where you can't stop the guy. He's just a monster scorer. Another name I wanted to put out there because you kind of threw it out in your little tidbit is Harrison Barnes. Without Iguodala, I think you got to factor. I mean, again, this isn't a great matchup for him, but the pace of it and his price. I mean, 4,100 on DraftKings and 7,700 on Fantasy Draft. That's too cheap for me. He's not someone I'm dying to roster, but I think there is some serious upside beyond that, especially if Klay Thompson doesn't get out to a good start or anything like that. I think there is a scenario where Barnes hits 30, 35 fantasy points if all things go well. So let's talk about LeBron James because I think he deserves at least a little consideration. If we're off Durant, LeBron has a chance to play the whole game, even though Orlando's kind of a mediocre team themselves. And his price on DraftKings, 9,300, and it's 9,800 on FanDuel, which I assume is a little cheap for him. But that DraftKings price, do we have to use him somewhere at that price, or are you just avoiding him because of the matchup? Why don't you take that, Collacchi?
I really like him on DraftKings. I think Fantasy Draft, he's 18-4 or something like that. Is that right?
16-6.
Yeah, I'm going to have him. He's going to be in my lineup. There's really nothing else to say.
So he's the equivalent of 8,300 on DraftKings on Fantasy Draft.
I'm definitely going to have him on Fantasy Draft because Benny mentioned the starting lineup for the Orlando Magic. Evan Fournier is not going to be the guy that he continues to guard LeBron James. And when you look at LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers' new kind of their fast lineup, LeBron plays some 4 with Kevin Love at the 5. We saw this morning that Lou said that all three of the stars should be playing tonight and tomorrow. So that puts LeBron James at the 4 for probably around 20 minutes or so. As we all know, the Magic, I believe, are 24th against power forwards this season. So it gives LeBron an even better matchup. And with that being said, he is still LeBron James, and that price for me is just too low.
Does anyone have anything else to say about small forward? Because I think it's a pretty condensed spot tonight.
Kevin Love was actually just downgraded to game time decision. So if Love's out, LeBron's definitely in play.
Oh, yeah, all LeBron. Yeah.
You know what? We've actually heard this last week. Tyronn Lue said he's going to start sitting them all, and I think we were talking about this earlier today with Josh and I on DM. If they're going to start sitting one of these guys each game, you got to upgrade the other two. So, like last game, they sat LeBron. Kevin Love put up like 54 fantasy points. So if Love sits today, excuse me, I think we got to tick up LeBron and maybe even Kyrie in this matchup.
Yeah, LeBron becomes possibly a guy I go 100% of on both DraftKings and Fantasy Draft if, in fact, Kevin Love sits. That is a monster development, in my opinion, because not only does it give them more usage, but now I think it gives Orlando a better chance to compete if they're using guys like Channing Frye, who, by the way, is in a revenge game against them, or Tristan Thompson's or Mozgov's are playing more minutes. That's certainly not as beneficial. But let's move on to power forward. I guess we're scratching Kevin Love off as an option then if he's been downgraded, but he was never really on my list in the first place. I think Julius Randle's my guy tonight in the mid-tier against a Phoenix team that's not very good defensively pretty much anywhere. I mean, people tend to focus on guards against them, but I don't really respect any of their guys besides Tyson Chandler for short stints in terms of, guys I'm scared to use against them. I mean, Randall's been pretty much a double-double machine, so I like the pace of that game. I think there's going to be plenty of missed shots on both sides, so he should have a chance for some rebounds, and that's who I'm going with. Collacchi, do you want to start us off at power forward?
Well, I wanted to touch on your Randall point there. When you look at DVP, the Suns are actually good against centers, but you have to keep in mind this is a team that has been running all season long. So a lot of teams will take their centers off the floor. So I do think that is a better matchup than people would like to think about. The other guy I think I'm looking at as among some other power forwards I have, but I think he's a guy that all of us like tonight, and that's Gorgui Dieng. I know Benny's a big fan of this guy. I know Nick likes him. I know Benny likes him. I think this is a guy that basically all of us are going to have. And honestly, how many times have we talked about power forwards against the Houston Rockets? That's exactly what Dieng is. And Benny's mentioned before on this show, whenever he gets close to 30 minutes or over, the guy's an absolute monster, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, he's very minutes dependent, like a lot of guys are, and he hadn't been playing all that great lately, so his price has come down a little bit. So he's definitely somebody I'm looking at tonight. I also like your boy Nerlens Noel, though, from the Philadelphia 76ers. You figure when Cantor's in the game, who everybody's talking about, Cantor's going to get minutes and have a big game tonight. Well, Cantor's horrendous on defense, so when he's in there, that's going to be good for Nerlens. And also, this is a fast-paced game, which is where he tends to do well. You know, him and Ish run that pick and roll pretty well, and he also gets a lot of points by finishing in transition. And, you know, in a game that's paced up where you're going to see a lot of extra possessions, he's also one of the better rebounders that the Sixers have as well. They're still without guys like Covington, as far as I know. You know, Okafor's still out. So he's still going to see 30-something minutes. Even if it turns into a blowout, he's still probably see a few minutes in the fourth quarter as well. So I also like Nerlens in the mid-range. And, I mean, I know we haven't talked about him, but it goes without saying. I think both DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis are in pretty decent spots tonight. I know some of you guys aren't as high on Cousins as I am, but I just can't play Anthony Davis in cash because it was my New Year's resolution. So I'm playing DeMarcus Cousins because there's enough value to fit him in today.
Nick, you want to comment on the power forward position, and then we'll get into the DeMarcus Cousins discussion.
Yeah, on FanDuel, Tobias Harris is a power forward, and you touched on him earlier. I think I'm locking him into cash for sure. And then Collacchi just talked about Gorgui Dieng. I love this spot for him. Multiple blocks, multiple steals in every game, or pretty much every game lately. So that's like, if he gets 2 blocks, 2 steals, you're getting 8 fantasy points right there. So his floor is really, really high lately. If you get, and it's not a back-to-back. You see his minutes when they get ticked down. It's always on a back-to-back. So he's had a day off. I think this is a great spot. Rockets 29th against power forwards, and they're going to turn the ball over. So Jang's in a perfect spot. So I'm locking him into cash as well. If not those guys, I kind of like, you guys touched on Noel. I like Noel too. Serge Ibaka for the against the 76ers. I like this spot for him. I know he's let us down a ton, but I think this is a good spot for Ibaka. They're going to run up and down the floor. No real big for the Sixers unless it's just Noel. So I think this is a good spot for Ibaka. No one's going to be on him because he always lets down, but he has a real chance to 5x at 5,300 on FanDuel tonight.
Yeah, and Collacchi, let's get into the DeMarcus Cousins discussion and why you and I don't think are going to be using him. I don't think I'm going to use him anywhere. It's his history against Andre Drummond, really, that, you look at this price for him, it's 10-2 on DraftKings and 18-3 on Fantasy Draft. And you need 3 times on Fantasy Draft, and you need 6 times on DraftKings to make you feel comfortable, right? Well, at his price on both, I think he's reached value on Fantasy Draft once against Andre Drummond and never on DraftKings against Andre Drummond. And I don't know, it's not like he's had any bad games. He's just, floated around 49 fantasy points. And when you look at him for that price, or you look at James Harden for $200 more, I mean, for me, that's just an easy decision considering, maybe on Fantasy Draft you can fit 2 stars if you go with some punts, but on DraftKings it's very difficult to fit 2 guys over 10K.
Yeah, I looked at that this morning, and Cousins' price on FanDuel is $11,100. I can't pay that. And one of the things that I was looking at between both of those players, Cousins and Drummond, neither one of them at their prices on FanDuel have ever reached 5x against each other. So I think that's definitely something to consider. I know it's not a huge sample size. I think it's only 7 or 8 games, something like that. But there's been some games where some of them got into foul trouble. There have been some games where they just went at each other. But both of them are actually not known to be great defenders, but the problem is both of those guys have really high usage rates. So if they're both defending each other, sometimes that leads to foul trouble, and I think that's what had happened before. It's a big reason why a lot of those games haven't resulted in a lot of fantasy points for either player. So I'm not going to be on either one of them.
Yeah, and I think the last guy I want to touch on, his price has come up, and I think that's why we haven't mentioned him, but on Fantasy Draft only, I think Dirk Nowitzki is in play for tournaments because he's kind of got a spotty history against the Warriors, and I would guess, I got to look in more to the game logs, but I would guess it's because they've been blown out in the games where he's struggled. But you look at his last game against them, I'm pretty sure it was either 35 or 40 fantasy points. It was one of his better outings against them, and Dirk Nowitzki's red hot right now. And I think, without Iguodala, maybe they play smaller a little bit. Maybe he sees some minutes against Spates or some of the other guys not named Andrew Bogut. And I think this is a good spot for him to put up 35 fantasy points in an up-paced game yet again. The problem is his price on DraftKings up to 6,600 because he's been pretty much floating around 40 fantasy points, and you pretty much need that again. And I'm not sure you get quite there, but I do feel pretty good about you getting, a solid outing from Dirk. So that's why I think it's fantasy draft only for me. Does anyone have anything else to say at the power forward? I've got one more guy on my list. I'm wondering if any of you have him.
I have some Draymond Green in my lineups tonight. I think that it's a spot where his price has stayed up. He rarely reaches an excellent ceiling because of the way that the Warriors have been playing lately. But I mentioned earlier what I think about this game. I think he's going to play center a lot tonight, and I think that's one of the things that gives him an excellent chance to be a good value because that means he's going to have a ton of chances for rebounds. As well, if the Mavericks play their small lineup rather, he's going to have an entire game basically against Dirk Nowitzki. And we all know Dirk Nowitzki is not a defensive force, especially at this side of his career. So I think this is a game that Draymond Green could kind of break out, maybe an 18-point, 11 rebounds, 7 assists kind of game. He has the upside for blocks and steals. So I think the way this pace is for this game and the matchup is perfect for him. Now, his price for me is too high in cash, but I love him in tournaments as I probably will be stacking that game in some lineups.
Yeah, and the other guy that I wanted to mention that you didn't get to, the DVP matchup actually looks bad. I mean, you look at efficiency, Portland 5th in efficiency, but how about Ryan Anderson in the faster-paced games? I mean, he's one of those guys who you never really want to use in cash unless Davis is out, but, occasionally he will blow up for those 20 to 25 actual point games, and this could be one of them. I mean, I'm trying to think of the guys who are going to step out on him. I mean, I think Leonard maybe had the best chance, but now it's a bunch of guys who prefer defending the post for their power forward spot, and Anderson, of course, a stretch 4, so he won't be doing much of that. I think Anderson's got, that potential to get 30, 35 fantasy points, but mostly from scoring. Does anyone else have anything else to say about power forward, or should we move on? All right, we'll move on then. Let's go to center, and let's actually stay with that game because I was surprised to hear of the consensus when before the show people were asking, who's my crazy guy today? And I thought this guy was crazy, but it turns out he's not. Mason Plumlee. Without Myers Leonard, I think that extends his minutes a little bit, and you look at this matchup, and of course it's one of the worst teams in the Pelicans at defending opposing centers, so I actually think Plumlee has a good chance for 30 fantasy points to approach that double-double. And he's pretty reasonably cheap or priced everywhere. I mean, 4,700 on FanDuel looks like the most difficult spot to get him in a lineup, but 4,000 on DraftKings and 7,400 on Fantasy Draft is basically nothing. So I know people are going to be looking at other cheap centers, but I think he's got to be in the conversation. So let's start with you, Nick. Who do you like at center tonight?
Yeah, I was actually going to use Plumlee as my bold call, and I didn't realize so many people were going to be on him, like you were saying. But I think he's got a definitely reasonable chance to double-double tonight, and they're running the offense through him some. I mean, he's getting assists. They run that pick and roll with Lillard and McCollum and Plumlee a lot, so this matchup's just perfect for Plumlee. I think his price has come down on FanDuel, actually. He used to be around like 5,300 last week. So he's definitely more expensive on FanDuel, but I think he's got a great chance to hit 30 FanDuel points tonight. So, I mean, we talked about Cantor and we just talked about Plumlee. Those are the two guys I'm really considering for cash tonight, unless we get beyond the play, too.
Yeah, and I mean, it's weird because it's not like there aren't expensive centers in play tonight. It's just they're not really the ones we're considering tonight, right, Benny? I mean, you're on board with these mid-tier guys, right?
Yeah, I mean, mid-tier, maybe even lower tier is kind of the way I'd look at it. Plumlee at 4K on DraftKings, I think is just way too criminally underpriced. Depending on what happens with Toronto, if Valanciunas is out again, I'll pay 4,600 for Bismack Biyombo again as well. He had 25 points the game that Jonas went out hurt. Then he came back with 35 the next game and 52 in the last game. So he's been giving you 6, 7, 8x on his value. I mean, I think that 52 might have even been like an 11x value kind of game. So I think he's in play. And then also Enes Kanter is another guy. I was a little shocked when I looked at the game logs. I hadn't been somebody that's been using him a lot lately. But he's given you about 30 fantasy points in about 6 or 7 of his last 7 or 8 games. And his price is right around 5K, so that's about 6x value for you. Plus, they're going up against Philly, who's one of the worst matchups that you can. Well, Philly's one of the worst against center, so one of the best matchups for an opposing center. And we know that opposing centers have been putting up some big numbers against them. So you got a guy playing well who very likely may see more time if it turns into a blowout because he is the backup. And he's going up against one of the worst teams that he can be going up against. So I think that this is a good spot for Cantor as well. So 5,200, 4,600, 4,000 on DraftKings. I haven't seen a reason why I want to pay up for some of these top guys today because I think there's enough cheap value guys that can get you 30, 35 fantasy points that's kind of where I'm going to be looking.
Well, even if you're not comfortable with these guys, which I certainly think you should be with some of these guys, I mean, Alex Len at 6,800, people are going to look at that price and say it's gone way, way up from where it had been. But if you ask me, I mean, on this pretty crappy Suns team, this is where he should be. This is where he should level off. I mean, I think Len is a guy who's going to, once he develops fully, going to be a double-double type center with the blocks. He may even be a guy that pushes 15 to 18 points per game. I just think Len is a very good talent, and against the Lakers tonight, you're probably going to start to see glimpses of that. I mean, I have a hard time imagining that Len isn't going to bounce back in a big way against them. His price on FanDuel is a little high, I mean 7,100, but 12,000 on FanDraft, so he's basically a $6,000 player on DraftKings, and that's the comfort range for him. That's where we can get a substantial amount of value for him, and I really like the matchup for him. Again, I think there's going to be a lot of value from this game. I know Josh has been kind of looking at that Golden State game, but, I mean, Alex Len, Julius Randles, Devin Booker, I like a lot of this game, to be honest. I love the games without defense. Josh, who are you looking at center? Is Len someone you would consider, at least on Fantasy Draft?
Yeah, on Fantasy Draft, I would at that price. But the three guys I have listed at center are all the guys that you guys mentioned before, Cantor, Plumlee, and Biyombo. The way I'm going to approach this is if Valanciunas is out, Biyombo is just going to go in my lineups for cash. Now, I do think he's going to be ridiculously high earned. He just had about 9,000 rebounds last night. So he's definitely going to be a guy that a lot of people just plug and play if Valanciunas is out. If Valanciunas plays, though, I think it's an easy pivot for me to Mason Plumlee in that fantastic matchup against the Pelicans. There's no Myers Leonard. Pelicans are one of the worst in the NBA against centers. And as Nick mentioned, they run the pick and roll with him. So that's just a great spot for him to get points. We know he's going to get defensive rebounds because nobody else really is there to take the boards from him since Ed Davis isn't playing big minutes. And, of course, if I'm looking in GPPs, I really do like Cantor tonight. And I know I talked about on Wednesday the fact that I don't love his ceiling because I think maximum it was 6x. He has 26 and 28 minutes, 2 of his last 3 games. So those minutes are coming up. The Sixers, as Benny said, are horrible against centers. So I think that's an excellent way to put it. So basically, I'm just echoing your guys' thoughts at center. And the only other one I saw here that I don't think anybody has talked about was actually Tyson Chandler. Now, I know he's a guy that everybody's going to be like, I don't know if I want to use him tonight. He's strictly a GPP play, and the reason why, he's in the same price range as Biyombo, the same price range as Plumlee, and he's a little bit cheaper than Cantor. Not many people are going to have him, but he still has that matchup as a center against the Lakers. If he gets over 25 minutes, you're looking at a return of 25 to 35 fantasy points, which is excellent for a guy at that ownership at that price.
Well, let me help you out for a second, Collacchi. Let me be your hooked on phonics, your Rosetta Stone for a minute. It's Valanciunas, like Shinsu Chu. So say it with me, Josh.
Chunas.
There you go. If you've ever seen the movie Eddie, that always makes me think of the guy who's hooked on phonics, and he keeps saying words. That's always what that makes me think of when you go with Rosetta Stone.
I feel like I'm in that Big Daddy scene where they just Hip Hop Anonymous? That's what I feel like right now. So, Chunas.
Oh, it's funny to give it back to you because I've been accused of skimming before and people make fun of me for not being able to read. So it's funny to give it back. But let me finish off the center list since we don't have that much time. I think there is one guy you could pay up for, and that's Karl Anthony Towns. I seem to like this guy every single day, but I don't think in cash games I have any motivation to do it with all these low-priced options. But maybe, just maybe, while everyone's paying down, it could be a night where Karl Anthony Towns explodes in what isn't a great matchup but the pace is there. If you could find a sneaky way to get 50, 60 fantasy points from him in that pace, he is worth the price, even though it is a little high. I think Jared Solinger, people are going to be off with Kelly Olynyk back, but I still think he's going to play in the upper 20s of minutes. And again, we've mentioned pretty much every game today is fast-paced, so he's going to flirt with a double-double. And this depends on matchups and what the lineup for Dallas looks like, but I think Andrew Bogut's a guy I mentioned in the rotations article whose minutes have been slightly up without Festus Ezeli. He's actually been playing pretty much 2.5 minutes more per game, which for a guy who averages over a fantasy point per minute is a big deal. Now instead of 5 times, we're talking about flirting with 6, and that price of $4,200 on DraftKings and $8,000 on Fantasy Draft, there is some serious potential for him to, eclipse that easily. He's another guy, kind of like Jang, who gets the blocks, the steals, the assists. He can contribute in other ways. So I do like Bogut depending on the matchup. Do we have anything else to say about center, guys? I think we've pretty much exhausted it.
I also don't like
All right.
Steve. I also don't hate Steven Adams too much either. I think he's worth mentioning, especially if this game can stay close for 3 quarters. The Sixers don't rebound the ball well at all, and the same reasons we're on Cantor, we should be on Adams. He doesn't fill up the stat sheet with the points as much as Cantor can, but he definitely rebounds the ball better, I think.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure he comes at a cheaper price. Yeah, $4,100, so you're saving $1,100 going to him. Doesn't have the upside. He's probably a cash play, but yeah, he's probably worth at least mentioning. Let's get to the bold calls, the segment everyone loves, the segment I screwed up badly on Wednesday, so I'm looking for a rebound. Let's start with you, Benny. Why don't you start with your bold prediction for tonight?
Yeah, assuming that Bismack Biyombo gets the start, I think that on sites where you can do it, you want to play 2 centers tonight. One of them is Mason Plumlee, the other one is Bismack. And I think if you do that, you're leaving yourself $42,000 to fill the other 6 spots out on DraftKings, which gives you about $7,000 per position, or a whole bunch of guys at 6K and one guy at 10K. And I think you could build some really good cash game rosters by putting those 2 centers in at $4,000 and $4,600. And I think you wind up getting 65 to 70 fantasy points out of those 2 guys. So that's my bold call. Use Plumlee and Bismack, and you basically can't. Well, maybe you can, but it would take a really bad lineup to screw up a cash lineup, but that'll get you into over the cash line with those 2 guys in it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Those are 2 of my favorites. I would love that to happen. I hope it's true. Nick, why don't you give us your bold call? I guess Plumlee's going to be involved, will he not?
No, I'm not going to use that. It seemed to. Benny just took it, so we talked about earlier, but I'll go with Gorgie Jang. 7X's on FanDuel, 6,400 goes for 45 plus FanDuel points.
There you go. We are very much in unison tonight, boys. This is an unusual occurrence for us. Collacchi, you want to keep the melody going, or are you gonna take us off the rails?
I'm definitely going to screw this up. There's no doubt. Basically, my bold call tonight is I think the winning lineup is going to have a Dallas Golden State stack, and Klay Thompson's going to have 40 real points tonight. I think this is the night he just gets absolutely on fire, maybe 8 or 9 3-pointers. I think this is just the perfect spot to him in transition to just get hot and get a lot of real points in a short amount of time.
Well, here's a piece of news that just came across. Serge Ibaka out due to rest, so that certainly changes things.
That's huge for Cantor.
Yeah, I think that pretty much makes Cantor the top overall play on the board on certain sites. That certainly locks him in for me. But I'll start with I'll go along with my bold call. I'm going to watch the Lowry news. I think Lowry sits now that you said that, and I think we're looking at 50 fantasy points from DeMar DeRozan with the potential to go for 55 to 60. I think you mentioned 40 actual points for Klay. I think we get 35 from DeMar DeRozan. So I really love that guy tonight. That's a mid-range guy I'm looking at. But let's talk about Ibaka. Does that make you want to use Durant and Westbrook more, or is that overthinking this?
I think it helps Nerlens Noel a little bit because Ibaka is a very good defender. So without Noel, you're looking at guys like, I don't know if Adams and Cantor will play together. I think Durant will play a little bit more of the 4. Maybe Waiters will come off the bench, play the 2 with Roberson mixing in at the 3. So I think Durant could get a lot more rebounds tonight, and Noel definitely has a better matchup not having to go against Ibaka.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the potential options that could benefit from this. I mean, I guess Kyle Singler, but I have no interest in using him. I guess Randy Foye. I guess Dion Waiters. I mean, I would guess they go small more often, or maybe even, like you said, move Durant to the 4 and maybe some more minutes with Cantor. So I think that solidifies him. Any final words, gentlemen, before we? Wow, now I need hooked on phonics. Any final words before we log off today? Anyone we didn't mention? Any news you want to get to? All right. It sounds like we are out. There's our bold predictions. There's all our calls. Have fun making some money with those tonight. We are certainly going to look forward to that. Again, check out rotocurve.com. We're going to have a free roll next week of some sort, I would assume. Again, check out the NBA tools. We got PGA tools. I mean, Masters pricing was just released. We got all kinds of things going on. So follow along with us, and good things will happen. Until next time, we are the Daily Fantasy Pivot, and we're out.